Hello, everyone, and welcome to this event hosted by the Baltic program at the Center for Geopolitics at Cambridge University. My name is Bajarūnas. I'm a Baltic Fellow here at the Center, and it's my great pleasure to host this event. Today, we will be diving into the history of NATO enlargement in the Eastern Baltic. In the 1990s, the idea of Baltic states NATO membership sounded a bit like a bad joke, at least here in the West. If someone raised this idea, the response at the time was, are you okay? Are you out of your mind, perhaps? Or do you need help to go back to reality? And yet, just a few years later, in 2004, the three Baltic states actually became fully fledged NATO members. So, how come? How did it happen? Why did NATO admit the three Baltic states? Why did Russia let them go? What did the Baltic states do to make that happen? What stars aligned to facilitate Baltic states' NATO accession? And so today, we have here three of the most competent speakers to tell us that story. These are diplomats who were at the center of that process back then in all three Baltic states. So we will have three presentations in a row, followed by a Q&A session. We will be going south to north today, so the first will be Lithuania. And so our first speaker is Ambassador Eitvydas Bajarūnas, who is now a visiting fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis in Washington, D.C. Eitvydas has held various overseas postings, including Ambassador to the UK, Russia, and Sweden, Consul General in St. Petersburg, and Deputy Ambassador at the mission of Lithuania to NATO in Brussels. He has also served as Political Director at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador at Large for Hybrid Threats, and Director of several units within the MFA and the MOD. He was also the diplomatic advisor to the President of Lithuania and a consultant for the NATO Affairs Commission in the Lithuanian Parliament. Ambassador Bajarūnas holds an MA in War Studies from King's College London and a diploma in Applied Mathematics from Vilnius University. He's also an author on articles on Russia's foreign and security policy, hybrid threats, and Baltic and Nordic security and defense. So Eitvydas, we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Donatas. Thank you very much, all those listening to this conversation. I think, Donatas, you're right. We now passed nearly 30 years from the process. We are now celebrated 20 years of Lithuania's, Latvia, Estonia, and many other countries joining NATO, but the process started much more in advance. So we are now in this threshold that we now treat this process indeed as a history. The history of Lithuania's, I probably speak about Lithuania, but extrapolate this to the three other countries, or referring to the three countries. Lithuania's journey started not from 1991 with Lithuania's formal de facto regaining independence, but in the earlier Sąjūdis, Lithuania's national movement debate, the joining Europe was very much slogan. Joining Europe very much was in the programs and in the lips of the speakers. And indeed, with regaining independence, 1992, Lithuania adopted. In 1992, Lithuania adopted constitution, and adjacent document to the constitution was non-alignment with post-Soviet spheres act, constitutional act, which firmly said Lithuania is not joining any post-Soviet structures, meaning that Lithuania's future is with Europe, with transatlantic community. Our familiarization process with NATO started for many countries, 1992, when NATO launched North Atlantic Cooperation Council structure, loose structure to engage post-Soviet countries, and then of course followed 1994 with January with NATO announcing Partnership for Peace, which in a way became as a sort of a platform to force the military cooperation between NATO and non-NATO member states, and for referring now in the retrospective. Of course, it's help us to understand NATO, to encourage political military reforms in Lithuania, and to prepare for NATO membership, although PFP, Partnership for Peace, was not directly orientated. I remember being one of the co-authors of the first Lithuania's PFP program, which was very loose, 3-4 items: Lithuania's army soldiers training English language, few political consultation, and that's it. But this was beginning. In parallel to the PFP and the other formal process of NATO, there were informal talks, which we as Lithuanians we followed. Of course, initially, as we know from the literature, President Clinton was not in favor of NATO enlargement, meaning that Europe Europe and the world in post-Cold period should better go for sort of other forms of cooperation. But such leaders of Czech Republic and Poland, like Václav Havel and Lech Walesa, of course, they presented convincing arguments. Why not? We are part of Europe. We want to join these structures. So finally, around 93, 94, Clinton was convinced. And this is where Lithuania came. In 1994, already January, exactly coincided with, in coincidence with the PFP. Lithuania's President Brazauskas sent formal letter to then Secretary General of NATO, Manfred Werner, asking for Lithuania to join NATO. This was based on the prior to that, in 1993, Lithuania's national security concept, which was agreed by all Lithuania's parliamentary parties, and which again very, very clearly stated that Lithuania's future is with NATO. Actually, in 1994, I wrote an extensive article about this, being then fellow of the Chatham House, and Donatas gently agreed that this article will become part of the future link to this U2 program. This article is about this is Chaillot paper of the French Institute, which published this 3 articles of 3 Baltic experts on our security and defense policy, which again 3 of us were very clear in line of joining NATO. In parallel to the process of PFP, which became, as I said, tool of cooperation between NATO and non-NATO member states, NATO was under pressure to present arguments in favor of or against in NATO enlargement. And when the process started to be cemented about 3 potential candidates, Czech Republic, Poland, Hungary, initially also Slovakia, but with the then Prime Minister Mečiar, Slovakia was dropped out of this process. NATO came in this September 1996 with a package which is called NATO membership requirements, and some of the requirements were clear, but some of them were quite extensively stimulating the country's debate. First is political stability, democratic governments. It was, of course, first of all, of course, the functioning democratic system, civil control over the military, which was key requirement, and military capabilities on a NATO interoperability. In a way, the contribution of potential member states to NATO collective defense, and economic and political criteria for EU membership, which in a way corresponded with then a Copenhagen criteria of European Union. Copenhagen criteria agreed in 1992 became platform for our countries to join European Union. And in a way, these 2 processes, EU and NATO, started to join together. So with NATO requirements and with Copenhagen criteria, these 2 processes started to coincide. Okay, how we look in this with this criteria? Because Lithuania's foreign policy became very clear in that period. Good neighborly relations, joining EU, joining NATO. So this buzzword was, we need to establish good relations. Belarus, Russia, very difficult neighbors, but we need to work with them, because this is also great foundation for Lithuania joining joining NATO and EU. The more tricky issue was with the contribution to Lithuania's defense, to NATO defense. And here, this especially when many NATO experts started to talk about the undefensibility of the Baltic countries. How can small country can contribute? And this slogan that, okay, you will be only the receivers of security, you will be our clients, and so this made Lithuania to think how we can do about this. And then in 1995 already, brilliant idea came that Lithuania's platoon was trained by Danish army, and together with Danish forces was sent to UNPROFOR, the UN mission in Croatia, in Krajina. So Lithuania soldiers became acquainted with the UN, but because this was a NATO country, Denmark, Danish, the NATO system, and from that we took this obligation that each and every operation of Lithuania will go. It will be NATO will go. It will be with Lithuania's participation, big and small. So that was very, very important factor. Of course, in parallel to the noises coming from Russia, then Prime Minister Primakov came with this red line policy that, okay, Czech Republic, Hungary might join, but free Baltic joining NATO would create, and all he go this, it would create another dynamic in the Baltic Sea. It would be friction between NATO, EU, and so on, NATO and Russia. So in parallel, in order to cope with this Russia's noises, NATO came with a signing of a NATO-Russia Founding Act in 1997, which was an important document, especially knowing that it's not only created foundation for NATO-EU cooperation, but also it established so-called free no's, no intention to and no plans and no requirements to locate nuclear weaponry in new country territories, but also no substantial forces. Of course, not only Russia's opposition was factor impeding Lithuania joining NATO, but also skeptical views from NATO. For example, 1997, Iran Corporation published a famous study. Actually, one of the authors was a big friend of the Baltics afterwards, Ron Asmus. And this study was very critical and very skeptical of Baltics. So instead of criticizing, Lithuania's approach was, okay, we need to speak with the authors. Let's invite to Lithuania. Let's show what we do. And that was a very, very important factor in engaging NATO experts. So the breaking line, of course, came with NATO Madrid summit, which in 1997, which is famous for several moments. One is it's opens the possibility for non-NATO countries to open missions at NATO headquarters, and we done. And I became deputy ambassador to this. This NATO summit was also in Madrid, 1997, became important also because the three countries were invited to join NATO: Czech Republic, Poland, and Hungary. From our side, it was absolutely we were supportive of this, even that Lithuania was not part of this process, because this made breakthrough. We knew that we might be the next, but of course not in the moment. And of course, there was quite a positive language. I remember our Nordic friends were quite happy that this language came. So the Madrid summit, not directly mentioning Baltic countries, but recognizes the progress achieved towards greater stability and cooperation by the states in the Baltic region. So for many experts, this became a symbol that NATO have strong view on the Baltic countries. It recognizes, so we became eventually philosophically in part of the next round. So next round was not coming easily, and we started to think about strategy. And the strategy of joining NATO have several pillars. One is to work with Americans, to work with U.S. Congress administration, and this is where this famous in U.S. Baltic Charter of January 16, 1998 came, which recognized that the it was recognized that the US endorsing Baltic NATO aspirations and supporting our integration to NATO. We started also to work with other allies. We started to use various informal ties, like, for example, Sweden, non-allied, neutral country, became very supportive. Very supportive was Polish diaspora in United States. Polish American Congress in around 2000 wrote a letter to the Congress that we are supporting free Baltic countries. So again, imagine millions of Polish started to write letters to Polish to the congressmen in support of the Baltic countries. Lithuania came with then a bit of a crazy idea, as I now see. One Baltic, meaning that Estonia is moving well with the EU membership, and exactly Estonia was in the first round of EU negotiations back already in 1997. Lithuania have, as we saw, a better chance to join in NATO. But of course, this idea became obsolete when our American friends and the rest say, you cannot do this. Three Baltic countries are packed together, and you should join NATO together. And this idea started to develop that we should not promote Lithuania as a lone membership, not even Baltic membership. And this idea came that we should promote big bang policy. France, Italy started to be very supportive for Romania's and Slovenia's joining NATO, Nordic countries favoring Baltic membership, and we combined this into the so-called Vilnius group. So this, again, loose institutional framework, which was established in Vilnius in 2000, encompassing Romania, Slovenia, Baltic countries, Bulgaria, Macedonia, Croatia, Albania, and eventually 9 of us became NATO members in 2004. So what are the factors? I am summarizing. What are the factors? And leaving the rest of the speakers to talk about other aspects of NATO membership. One of the, of course, key factor was that in the Baltic making through, we made reforms. We made military reforms. We made reforms up to the NATO criteria. The other factor was, of course, September 11, and that's also because Russia started to ally with America, with NATO, in the war against terrorism, and that's also made us window opportunity to in improving this NATO-Russia relations to join NATO. Second, of course, factor was that U.S. determination. When U.S., especially that was already seen from U.S. Baltic Charter, became favoring of Baltic membership, and that this weight of Americans became so big that it's finally made through. Two more factors, of course, final decision of NATO to incorporate the former Soviet area in as part of the NATO family, and of course I mentioned the synchronization with EU. So this is the factor I think became important in finally making this positive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eitvydas. That was excellent, and you're just on time. Continuing our journey from south to north, our next speaker is Mr. Andžejs Viļumsons, who is a state secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Latvia. He holds a master's degree in political science from the University of Latvia, and most of his career, Mr. Viļumsons spent in the field of security and defense policy. He has headed the Latvian MFA NATO section before being sent off in 2002 to Washington, D.C. to promote American support for Latvia's accession to NATO. While in Washington, he dealt primarily with the American security and defense policy community, including the Pentagon, and was responsible for facilitating Latvian-American military cooperation and Latvia's military participation in missions in Afghanistan and Iraq. He also worked closely with the Joint Baltic American National Congress, trying to popularize this idea that Baltic states' NATO membership would increase the security of the alliance. In 2003, he returns to Latvia to head the Defense Policy and Planning Department in Latvian MOD and dealt with all aspects of Latvia's military integration into NATO. So, Mr. Viļumsons, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I think my story will not differ much from what our Lithuanian colleague Eitvydas mentioned. I think the grand lines are the same. I think three factors basically were crucial for us to accomplish our task and join NATO. As I think first was determination, determination by ourselves and by our friends. Second was unity of efforts internally in Latvia and with our friends in the region and also in United States. And third element, I would say that I would call it black swan or moment or unforeseen surprise event that also Eitvydas already touched upon. So I think on the first factor, on determination, I think, you know, when we look to the countries that didn't or have not entered NATO and have been still how to say that are still not part of this alliance or even European Union. If we look at Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, I think the big difference with us was that we knew, 100% what we wanted from very beginning of separation from Soviet Union, from very beginning of independence. And I think that all our political forces were really united in what we want. We, from very beginning, we clearly wanted to run away from our previous oppressor, from aggressor Russia, and we knew that we want to rejoin all the European institutions that we were forcefully taken out before the World War I by two aggressors signing a deal, Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. So all the governments in Latvia, starting from very first one after independence, they clearly had NATO or initially, of course, not NATO, but EU organizations, all the major organizations in mind, and we all knew that neutrality would not work. That Russians would wanted to sell us, saying that look at Finland, how a nice model it would be. So we have tried the neutrality in the 30s and realized that it failed. So I think the factor of determination was really crucial. That really facilitated all the work that we needed to do, all the homework, all the boxes that we needed to tick to become a credible candidate. All the defense buildup, we all started from scratch, having nothing, compared to previous round members. So we were smart enough, I think, and determined enough to use all the experience that ethnic Latvian or ethnic Balts, when it comes to the other Baltic countries, could have provided, all high-level politicians, high-level officers. We took them to our armed forces, to our civil service, and took their advice. Ambassadors, chiefs of defense, even president in our case. So I think they played a great role in helping us to achieve our goals. Of course, our own determination to spend money on our security. When I started in security in '96, our defense budget was really minor. It was like 0.6%. And I remember in '98, our defense budget was $40 million US dollars. Then in '98, it went up to 1.75% and around 2% in 2003. And today is 1.1 billion euros. So just shows also how we are ready to do the job. Another factor that we had to cover and that people in the West were thinking about was what the minorities will say if we will join NATO. I think even the Russians tried to spread the rumors that the fifth column or so-called Russian-speaking minority would make a trouble if we join NATO. So we had spent a lot of efforts actually on increasing the public support show that minorities are also not against our membership in NATO and very much behind this. And of course, all the standards that we needed to achieve, including those on the protection of NATO secrets, all the security sector reforms. I remember shortly before we were invited in Prague summit in 2002. Well, basically we had to ask our officers who used to serve in Soviet army a hard choice. Either you keep your Soviet pension and leave the military service, or you give up the pension and stay in military service. So, on one hand, we lost in 2002 a great number of experienced officers, but at the same time, we cleaned up our own system from potential risks in the future. So that's a determination. On unity of efforts, I fully agree with Eitvydas. I think the crucial moment was unity of efforts. In Latvia, we really took it very painfully when the debate, for a reasonably short period, when there was this debate about potential one Baltic state joining NATO and one Baltic state joining EU. Our Latvian foreign policy has always been rooted in the Baltic cooperation, and of course, logical. We are in between two Baltic countries. There is no other democratic country around us. So for us, it's basically very basis of our foreign policy, and we were hoping that three together we can achieve things faster and better. So for a short period, there was this how we were seeing from Riga when our Estonian friends had this short period of trying to pair themselves with Finland, and our Lithuanian friends with Poland. But that was, of course, a short period, and I think everyone realized that the West looks at us as a one piece, as a Baltic region, and since that, I think we did great efforts in coordinating our tactics and strategies. And also, as Eitvydas said, I think we soon realized that three alone, we will not master it. And there, this idea of Vilnius 10, of this Big Bang group came, which made things much easier. And obviously, the focus of our efforts were in the United States. I remember, and the different reasons. One reason is that, yes, this Russia factor was much more prominent. This realpolitik factor was much more prominent in European capitals. I was part of these first membership action plan teams that we were preparing these new membership action plans after the Madrid summit, and we were traveling around NATO member states, and everywhere, in most European capitals, they would tell us, well, perhaps EU, but not really in NATO, even in London, So I think basically the only choice was to focus on US, also for the reason that US electoral system is much more open and much more, vulnerable for the outside influence or inside influence, because European electoral systems are so close that even, you cannot really penetrate the decision-making from the outside. But that's why our focus was really United States. And if I have to mention what were the main actors that helped us, I would say first of all was indeed ethnic community, Baltic community, and here I have to mention the huge role of joint Baltic American National Congress, community of three Baltic emigre groups. I think they did a massive job. They went together with the diplomats from embassies. They did a massive tour around US, mobilized the community. That was a small community, but they managed actually to turn the Congress and achieve the great sympathies. Obviously, there were also, professional lobbyist groups that our ethnic communities employed in both parties. But also role of our own leaders, leaders who we also tried to use to show the injustice that was done to the Balts, President Vairo Freiberga, who had to flee Latvia as a refugee on the autumn of 44 and grew up in Morocco and later in Canada, or of a foreign minister at that time, Sandra Kalniete, who was born in Siberia as a child to the people who were deported. So I think these were the groups, but then of course Black Swan moment, and here I come to my final point of 9/11, and I think it was indeed a moment that we did not anticipate, and that really helped us to show what the Baltic states can actually bring to the table in terms of the debate of the burden sharing that was really acute in the United States, because the US was always feeling that Europeans are underpaying for their security, they are underinvesting, and they are not helping to share the burden. So that gave us opportunity to show that when the Afghanistan operation came, when Iraq operation came, that we are able to contribute to these operations. Of course, it brought up a Pandora box of this debate of old Europeans versus new Europeans, or French fries versus freedom fries. That I think was a little bit, how to say, a debate that actually made a long impact in NATO discussions. And after that, Western Europeans for a while, for some 5-10 years, didn't trust us because they thought we jumped too quick in American boat when it came to the accusations of Saddam Hussein having chemical and biological weapons. And lastly, it helped us actually to somehow solve the Russian objections by showing the Russians that NATO is changing. NATO is going for anti-terrorism operations, and with the US strategy of upgrading NATO-Russia relations to NATO-Russia Council, I think it kind of helped to pacify the Russians. Thank you. I will finish with this at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Viļumsons. That was great. And finally, our last speaker is Sven Sakkov, who is the current Estonian ambassador to Finland. Ambassador Sakkov is an expert of defense and security policy. He has also served as a director of Tallinn-based think tank, International Center for Defense and Security. He was also a director of NATO Cyber Center of Excellence. During his 3 decades in different defense and security-related fields, Ambassador Sakkov has worked for President Lennart Meri and has been posted to Estonian mission to NATO and to Estonian embassy in Washington, D.C. Ambassador Sakkov is our actually fellow Cambridge man. He has an MPhil in International Relations from the University of Cambridge. So, Ambassador Sakkov, we're looking forward to what you have to say.
Thank you very much, Donatas, and good to be here and good to see old friends Eitvydas and Andžejs online. Again, haven't seen you guys live for already some time. I will start with one of the themes which Eitvydas brought up, which is basically when did the journey start? And in trying to answer that, I would say that one of the main determining factors was something what Andžejs brought up, and this is the trauma of 1939, 1940 and beyond. The fact that we were not able to hold on to our independence and freedom. The price we paid for that was horrendously huge, and that there was, very clearly a determination not to allow that to happen again. And for that, basically, I mean, if you think of the trauma of 1939. I think most Estonians would agree with me on the 2 lessons learned from that. One is that you should fight whatever the odds, against how big an opponent, because not fighting is worse than fighting. The case in point being comparison with Finland, which fought, lost a lot, but retained the most precious part of that, which is independence. And the second lesson learned is that in order that fight to be successful, you need permanent military alliances. So from that sense, the idea that we should join NATO was a no-brainer in 1991. It was actually a no-brainer also before that. So in competition of when did the journey start, I have at my hand a copy of a letter signed by Johannes Kaiv, acting Consul General of Estonia in charge of legation, meaning in US. He wrote a letter to Dean Acheson, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, sorry, of the United States on April 4th, 1949. By the way, as a footnote, US, among most other Western states, did not recognize Estonian, Latvian, Lithuanian occupation and annexation by the Soviet Union. And Johannes Kaiv congratulates Dean Acheson on the occasion of a signing of a North Atlantic Treaty in Washington, and says that this treaty very much is exemplifying everything what Estonia stands for, and Estonia would be very much liking to join the treaty, but unfortunately, we are occupied de facto. So very clearly, the intent was expressed by then Estonian diplomatic representative in Washington, in basically United States. So that's about the start of the process. Since previous speakers have gone through most of the territories, I have an opportunity to be in a role of giving some illustrations to some of the things what has been previously already said. One is, for example, about the P4P, Partnership for Peace, which started in 1994. And in some quarters, I have seen there is a understanding that that was a failed opportunity and there could have been something coming out of it. But unfortunately, by most people, the other path of enlargement of NATO was undertaken. I'm referring, for example, to a quite recent book by Mary E. Sarotte called Not 1 Inch, where basically she peddles that theory, which I think is a fundamental misunderstanding of what P4P meant. It was not in any way to anyone a substitute for NATO, but rather a practical tool for peace support operation forces, for getting to know each other, to formally opposing sides. And no one really, at least in our part of the world, thought that this is in any way a substitute or alternative to NATO. Estonian late President Lennart Meri, my first boss, actually called P4P or compared it to the empty bottle of Chanel No. 5 perfume. It's a nice bottle, smells good, but it's still empty. Moving on, in 1993, at the same time, basically, there was a very famous first article outlining actually the ramifications of NATO enlargement by Ron Asmussen, Steve Larrabee, and Richard Kugler. By the way, Larrabee passed away just last week, so rest in peace. Asmus is already gone. To the best of my knowledge, Richard Kugler is still around. A very seminal article titled Building a New NATO, which was published in September-October 1993 issue of Foreign Affairs, which is actually the first attempt to kind of start putting that into writing. The next important step in that field was in 1995, I think in September or October, NATO came out with a NATO enlargement study, which was basically a NATO bureaucracy's point of view of how to look at the issue, which was very hotly contested issue at that time, about NATO enlargement, whether that should be undertaken or not. That was also a time in 1995 when I kind of started my working career, and this NATO enlargement study was one of the first things which landed on my table at the office of the president, and NATO has followed me ever since, even to Finland, which was of course a surprise to many people. Now in 1997. I was completing my MPhil studies in Cambridge, and I actually wrote a thesis or a dissertation on a title, with a title, NATO enlargement in the case of border states, where I was looking at the state of play. It was summer, July 1997, when the handover date was, and I was looking at the reasons why the Baltic states were not admitted or will not be admitted at the Madrid summit of 1997. And I was basically combing through all the different things that have been said, why Baltic states cannot be admitted. Poland can, but Baltic states not. There are issues like minorities, indefensibility. So there's going to be too many allies, and it's, consensus would be very hard to reach. But there is no need for NATO anymore. But the Baltic states, at least some, have territorial disputes with Russia. But they have weak and incompetent military forces. And there are some others that I do not remember. And of course, one by one, they were able to be basically overturned or rejected. For example, minorities issue is pretty much a racist argument. But, such kind of people, with Russian, for example, as a mother tongue, cannot somehow be part of a NATO citizenship. Indefensibility, look at West Berlin during the Cold War. Too many allies at the table, hard to reach consensus. I was found a good evidence that from public sources, from commentators, that there are only 3 countries which, at that time at least, which were able to hold NATO from consensus, regardless of how many other smaller ones there are. And the 3 were basically US, France, and Turkey, and so forth. So that was in 97. In 1999, the next big step was the start of a membership action plan process, or A&P process, meaning annual national program process. I was at that time at Estonian mission to NATO, and that was a membership action plan, which we did 5 years. It was basically consisted of 5 different sub-programs. It was looking at political issues, whether a country's kind of political system is democratic and so forth, is ready to join NATO. Second one was economic issues, budgetary issues, whether the economy is okay. Third one was military chapter, looking at whether it is militarily up to the task of becoming NATO member. Fourth one was security, meaning secrecy of information, ability to keep it. And the fifth one was legal, basically how the laws of a country do allow, whether they allow joining NATO. And they and that was a kind of meticulous process with a annual feedback from allies, with high-level people coming to Brussels, to NATO headquarters, to lay out their case. So that was annually accompanied by Prime Minister, together with foreign and defense ministers coming annually to Brussels in order to talk about the previous year, how the kind of national program was completed, basically progressed, and listen to feedback of allies. And in a way, it was highly kind of, you can say bureaucratic, but it was a good way of taking issues one after the other away from a table. In the end, becoming or not NATO member is a political decision by countries for whom it might mean, going to war for those countries who are joining. But MAP gave us an opportunity to take one by one all the other issues off the table, so that no one was able to say that we are not ready because this and that. So that was the 5 years. It's very funny stories there. For example, I can maybe talk later about the importance of CD-ROMs and a nicely bound map ENP program and so forth. Not enough time to go through now, because the next stop, going very quickly further, was the really when the world started, as my colleagues already was 9/11, and was a fact that George W. Bush was president of the United States, and he was let's say forceful, courageous in decision making. And really, the 9/11 changed the world in a way, because it gave a bit of a time span when US and Russia needed each other, and there was a kind of a understanding that Russia was helping, in a way, assisting US in its efforts in ISAF through facilitating basing arrangement in Central Asian and countries and so forth. In a way, basically, we did use the window of opportunity, this short window of opportunity, and became a member of NATO. I mean, very many factors around and behind that. For example, strong support of the Nordic states, especially Denmark, which was crucial to us. The fact that the NATO-Russia Founding Act was signed in 1997. Nowadays, it's just an oddity and a weird thing still on the books, which should not. But at that time, that basically gave assurance to those people who wanted to see that, whether this is not somehow detrimental to NATO-Russia relations, or relations between major NATO countries and Russia. And now my last point is that as our path to NATO did not really start in 97 or 94 or 91 even. It started early. Also, our journey to NATO did not end in 2004 because NATO was not really, let's say, we became, or in 2004, brought Baltic states into NATO, but did not bring NATO into Baltic states. That only happened after 2014. Piecemeal, but started. Should have been started earlier, at least after the Russian aggression against Georgia in 2008. But we were not able to convince our allies about that. And now my really last point is that the overall, one of the conceptually conceptual mistakes what has been made about talking about NATO enlargement is, for example, when it is said to be expansion, because this is implies that there is someone who wants to expand NATO. Even enlargement is not a good term. It's really rather allowing countries who fulfill criteria to join NATO. No one wanted really us there. It was a hard job to get in. So if someone, and there are Russian propaganda, fellow travelers and useful idiots who are talking about, how aggressive NATO expanded, blah, 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 all that kind of thing. They do not know anything about NATO enlargement history. It was not a kind of a pull process. We were kind of pushing in through every window, crevice, and the chimney we were able to get in. Why? Because of 1939-1940, we needed a permanent military alliance to anchor our independence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sakkov. That was very enlightening indeed. Before I open up the floor to audience questions, I know that Ambassador Bajarūnas would like to come back to some of what has been said.
Thank you very much, Donatas. Thank you very much, Sven, Andžejs. I think this is, we didn't coordinate this so much, but it became, I talk about history, Andžejs went through continuation of joining, and the Sven then continued with this overarching atmosphere and philosophy of enlargement. I really want to make a few comments, and there is also a few questions. So one is I spoke about Polish community as a key factor, Polish American community as a key factor, but of course, Baltic American community was really decisive. And here, Andžejs made this, and I want to continue. Without Baltic internal support here in Washington, it would be very difficult for us to achieve consensus, attention-wise, and so on. So definitely. Andžejs mentioned leadership. Absolutely true. Not only the Vaiberga of Latvia, the Estonian leadership, but of course we were so lucky to have Valdas Adamkus, Lithuanian American, key personality. So when Valdas Adamkus spoke in NATO capitals about Lithuania, that was really massive support, and we felt this. Andžejs also mentioned these changes of Baltic military. Indeed, this was not small; it was big. When we asked Russian armies to leave, and we let everything to be taken, literally we were building our armies from the scratch. This was very painful. From other side, we didn't inherit this massive Russia's Soviet influence in our armies. Around 2005, many NATO colleagues were surprised coming to Lithuania, say that majority of our officers spoke English, and they were trained in the West. They have Western mentality, and to what Sven spoke about the PFP. I would also make one comment. If you take formally PFP is not geared for the enlargement, but very symbolical mechanism to get into the formal relationship with NATO was very supportive. I remember even writing NATO programs. You were learning. You were going through this learning process, learning curve, how to make it. For example, the same happens with Afghanistan when Lithuania had became leader of one of the ISAF PRT command in one of the provinces. For Lithuanian military, Afghanistan, also some of our special operation forces, this became a tool to understand what is NATO air support, how to call NATO intelligence, how to coordinate between various branches. So only in practical engagement you can get into this understanding of procedures, which became eventually a very crucial factor. And finally, there was also a question from Carlis about what Russia's role. Of course, Russia has played many roles against NATO enlargement. We know in the story of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, this story is still on. First of all, it plays very important role in our capitals, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Of course, in case of Estonia, Latvia, playing along the lines of the Russian minorities. But we were not also immune, Lithuanians. We had also some weak points. Energy, our media was not always transparent. So there was a lot of possibilities for Russia to play this hybrid warfare. But also in NATO capitals, Russia was extremely active. Russia first policy. Russia was promoting again this disagreement on NATO enlargement. So this Russia factor, especially hybrid Russia's warfare factor, it was against NATO enlargement was really very, very important. But that is what the life is about. Thank you.
Thank you, Eitvydas. Would anyone else like to come back to what Eitvydas said, or no? Okay, then yes.
If one thing which but very, very quickly, it's actually not really so much specifically about the Baltic states, but actually there have been 3 people who have very strongly and clearly influenced NATO's post-Cold War trajectory, and very surprising people to whom actually we can say NATO has survived very well, alive and kicking into 2024. And they are Slobodan Milosevic, Osama bin Laden, and Vladimir Putin. In the beginning of the 1990s, there was really a talk coming about what Warsaw Pact is over with. There is no role anymore for NATO. Russia is a friend and partner and all that kind of thing, and we don't need NATO. Then the wars in the Balkans started, and that saved in a way in early 1990s NATO. The second time NATO was saved was after 9/11. It got a real mission out of area operations, and was useful for the United States for that. And then the third time, really, when NATO got a new bolt of energy was, of course, with annexation of Crimea by Putin. So ironically, we can say that, of course, there are numerous Western leaders who can take a lot of credit for carrying NATO where it is now. It's actually a lot of credit goes to 3 war criminals, Milosevic, bin Laden, and Putin.
Thank you, Ambassador. Mr. Viļumsons, would you like to come back, or?
I think after the questions, if there will be questions.
Okay, great. In that case, let's start the Q&A. I'll ask the first question, if I may. I know you've touched upon this already, but the question is, why do you think Russia let the Baltic states go? Because we know what happens when they don't let someone go, like Georgia 2008 or Ukraine 2014. Why didn't they draw a line in the sand back then? And we have Putin on record in early 2000s saying that Baltic states NATO membership does not contradict Russia's vital interests and so on. Was Russia too weak to say no at the time, or were they convinced by the Americans and also perhaps by the Baltic states that Baltic states NATO membership actually was not too bad for them and perhaps even useful for them? Thank you.
Can I start on that? I did talk about the post 9/11 atmosphere, and I think one of the important factors was that Russia for some time tried to be useful for the United States. It saw very clearly, as we all did, how strongly that cataclysmic event changed US, and they saw that US can go at a very long length to do something that 9/11 will not happen again. And I think they had from the Russian side, they had a expectation, assumption, or hope that by being useful in that struggle to the United States, they will have more free hands in Chechnya, in their backyards, and so forth, in Central Asia, for example, and so forth. And of course, if that was not the case, it did not, materialize in the end, and they did not have a free hand of doing the post-imperialistic stuff what they wanted to do. I think that was the time when that equation soured. As I said, we used a window of opportunity. Russia was anyway going around bad mouth fingers. I gave you one anecdote actually from my Cambridge time. But I did a series of interviews in Brussels, also at NATO headquarters, and I also had a appointment with one senior Russian diplomat, and I basically introduced myself. I'm MPhil student from Cambridge, and then kind of writing a study on NATO case and the Baltic states. And so I asked him the same questions I asked from other people, including, for example, whether you think Balts will be invited to NATO. He answered no. I asked what are the reasons, and he said he then lectured me a long time on how badly the Russian minorities are treated in Latvia and Estonia. And I was thinking to myself, for God, how is he going to go on like that, giving me such weird, basically totally crazy propaganda? Because he should know that I know, but it's not the case. And in the end of the interview, when we already started to walk out of the room, he asked me, "So which part of England are you from?" And I said, no, I'm from Estonia. And then I saw it was basically a jaw-dropping moment. He realized that he thought he was talking to a Brit, a young Brit, and he was able to lie blatantly about what is happening in Estonia and Latvia. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very interesting stuff. Eitvydas, you would like to also say something?
Yeah, I would also make a comment on Russia's sort of, as you, Donatas, put it, why Russia let us go. Russia did not let us go. This is the answer. We became members of, I guess, because of set of circumstances, and our internal determination. We spoke about this, and of course September 11th was mentioned. I've been studying Russia for years, and when I came, we regained independence together, actually, and Russia formally, yes, in 1990s. But when I came as a consul general 2005 to Russia, the atmosphere against America, against NATO, was immensely negative. I'm not even comparing now atmosphere when I became ambassador to Moscow 2020. That was even more poisonous. But already 2005. So my answer is there were no internal preconditions for Putin to love NATO and to support NATO and enlargement. The calculus of Putin, as you said, to get a bit of positive on that was based on completely different circumstances. His elite, generals, everyone was so much against NATO, including, as I said, public was absolutely against NATO already then. I think Putin had some strategic calculation. First, not only America, but also Russia would suffer from Islamic fundamentalism. So he thought better to ally with America because it was not known how much Islamic fundamentalism, where it will go. The second, of course, reason was that this was earlier Putin. Putin, if we would be dealing with Putin after 2007 Munich, that would be completely different story. He was anti-Western. He was his own agenda. Back 2000, 2004, he was still maneuvering whether what we should do, and of course, finally, no, I do not have any confirmation. I might research on this but you know my passion on the hybrid and disinformation. I think Putin also calculated if I Putin would let these 10 countries or 9 countries, big band, to be NATO members, you might also think that there will be some Trojan horses within NATO who might be favoring of Russia's policy, which I don't know. I don't want to allude to some of EU NATO members, but I think Putin is right to some extent. If you let to NATO countries which would play along your policy, you are achieving this goal to destroy NATO from within. So just to say that this is my only theory, not confirmed by fact, but I think this is very much close to the reality theory.
Thank you, Eitvydas. Andžejs, would you like to chip in?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Indeed, of course, only Putin has an answer to this question. But you know, I really maybe don't care what was what happened there from Russian perspective, because actually, we knew that Russians don't want to let us in, and of course, all our efforts were geared towards dismantling this Russian objection. So our work in Washington was geared towards correcting the errors of the history, correcting injustice of the history, that two aggressors could sign a pact and divide the world. So I think that was where we put the emphasis on, and I think since American Congress recognized the fact that we have the free choice, that we ought to have a choice of choose our friends or our destiny. I think that was the most crucial moment, and perhaps Putin and the Russians seeing that where the Congress goes, where the Americans go, they realize that they will not be able to prevent this, and it's actually better to take advantage of it, and that's why this NATO-Russia Council came up, where the Russians got more privileges, and I think perhaps Russians were thinking that they will have more impact on NATO decisions, because of course afterwards, when I went to NATO, it was really impossible to talk about Russia without Russia. It was a taboo. In 2007 when I arrived there, if a NATO member would want to talk about Russia, it was impossible. They always told that this is not right. We have an agreement in 2002 NATO-Russia Council. We are equal partners. Everything should be discussed, in presence of Russia. So, and interestingly enough, I actually have heard also stories from people who worked with Lord Robertson, who was NATO section at the time when we got the invitation, they believe that Putin in 2002, when Lord Robertson went to Moscow, that Putin indeed has considered or believed that perhaps Russia could join NATO in the future. So I don't know what was in Putin's mind, but I think, well, we will perhaps never know this, but I think we don't care anymore about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andžejs. That's very interesting. Okay, let's go to audience questions now. There is one without a... okay, yes. So Anne Smith is asking, so looking back to the Baltic membership path, was a strategic opportunity lost at that time to further integrate Ukraine into NATO? Who would like to take that first? Yes, Andžejs.
If I can shortly, I think there was not an opportunity at that time. I think Ukrainians didn't want themselves at that time. That's what I referred that. Neither Moldovans nor Georgians nor Ukrainians, they were not clear about what they want. Thank you.
Does anyone else want to chip in on this? Ukraine?
Yeah, I also probably in the same line. We spoke previously that joining NATO is a set of conditions and circumstances where you cannot avoid of not meeting, not fulfillment. You cannot just say this country might join and that's it. Why Sweden? Why Sweden and Finland, when they made the application, the process was smooth. Okay, with some small problems under ratification, but in general, why? Because Sweden and Finland were meeting all criteria: strong political will, geographical location. They were part of Western institutions. They have excellent armed forces, functioning economies, and you name it. Of course, functioning democracies. So in case of Ukraine, they were lacking many of this criteria. Economy was very much weak, but of course, as Andžejs mentioned, there was a bit of confusion in many Western capitals. We as Lithuanians, we would love to support, but it was very difficult to promote, where country was split in a way, various voices. And then, of course, there was no big sponsor who would support Ukraine. In our case, definitely, and the colleagues mentioned, the Nordic countries, Denmark and Norway to some extent, they were very big sponsor within NATO. In case of Ukraine, they were lacking this also sponsor. So in a way, it's very big tragedy what is happening now. And Russia is using the NATO membership argument very much to legitimize what Russia is doing. But circumstances for Ukraine to join NATO was always very distant. Now we see contrary. Now conditions much more closer. That's why now we need to concentrate in supporting Ukraine NATO membership.
Thank you, Eitvydas. Ambassador Sakkov, would you like to chip in?
Yes, I agree with previous speakers.
Okay, thank you. And let's pick another question. So Darius Furmanavičius is asking, and his question is directed to Eitvydas. Mrs. Angela Nelsas, the president of Baltic American Freedom League, met with Condoleezza Rice during President George W. Bush's election campaign, and she succeeded in getting the statement in writing that President George Bush will support Baltic NATO membership. To what extent the Baltic diplomats have felt the presence of the advocacy in the Congress and in the US administration by these Baltic communities?
So in a way, Donatas, I already alluded to this to the question, but I might even expand to one or two more sentences. Baltic communities within the US was always a crucial factor, not only with the NATO membership, not only now with the need to support American decisions on Ukraine, but even back to the Soviet, to the Cold War period, where prospect of Baltics to regain independence was very bleak, and the Baltic communities were the last factor
And I mean, who would be disappointed with this situation? They have always been crucial, and they've always been sharp. And so without doubt, this is the, I mean, if not decisive factor, but at least factor which we very much cherish and support.
Thank you, Eitvydas. Any other takers on the role of diaspora in the United States? Yep.
I will just say, to repeat, indeed, it was huge. I think that the diaspora's role was huge. I mentioned also, we as governments, we also couldn't pay for lobbyists. That would be seen as intervention in internal affairs of the United States. If, I don't know, Latvian government start to pay for the lobby groups. That's why actually the whole payment of the lobby groups were done by American Baltic communities, at least in Latvian case. And of course it was not, when we speak about communities, it was not, of course, only the Baltic communities. I didn't mention, but I should actually mention also the role of U.S. Jewish community. We worked a lot with U.S. Jewish community over these years before the invitation, and actually their support was crucial as well. Them coming out in U.S. Congress hearings and testifying about the Baltic states positively, about the restitutions to Jewish survivors of the Holocaust during the World War II, about all the things that we did in the Baltic states to correct the wrongdoings of the history. I think that is another community whose role I have to mention alongside of the Baltic and Polish communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, let me ask another question. So it's about the foreign policy of each of the Baltic states at the time. Was there a multi-vector foreign policy that the Baltic states were attempting at the time, meaning that they were also, on the one hand, they were working the Americans to get them in, to get Baltic states into NATO, but they must have also, I assume, worked in Europe, especially in countries like France, but also Moscow, I guess. So trying to neutralize the places which were saying no, basically. Could you tell something about the role of the Baltic states in trying to convince these guys, and what sort of tactics were employed and strategy? Thank you.
Can I start here, if my colleagues permit? I mean, one issue which has not been touched too much tonight is the parallel processes of NATO and EU enlargement. And that was important. And that was important in a way because since we were on track of becoming EU members by 2004, that also meant that we had a very good hand in talking to our European friends about NATO issues also, because it would be first very hard to imagine then that someone will be, let's say, not supporting a fellow EU member when it comes to NATO enlargement, for example, and in a way, it also meant that this kind of parallel process meant that the EU new members were also coming under a extended US protection. Reminder that we joined NATO about was it like 1 month and couple of days before EU? If I remember correctly, EU was the 1st of May, and then of 2004, and I think NATO was 28th of March or something of that sort, if I remember correctly. Anyway, it was very, very close to two dates. So I mean, the EU enlargement was more conditions-based, so that helped us all the time. The fact that we were about to, complete that and inevitably become members of the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Eitvydas, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, indeed. I was already in my introduction alluded to this synchronization, NATO enlargement process and EU enlargement. Not least that the NATO requirements presented to us in 1996 were more or less corresponding with the Copenhagen criteria of 1992, which became backbone of EU enlargement and us becoming part of process. But indeed, this from Lithuanian angle, we from the very outset established trio of our foreign policy priorities, and they were always, we thought, should go hand in hand: good neighborly relations, joining EU, and joining NATO. So we thought that we cannot sell one issue against another and to put in the priorities. Of course, starting from good neighbor relations, dealing with Russia, fixing border, signing all necessary good neighborhood agreements was our task. Nobody would come and neither Americans nor Europeans could come and sign on our behalf. This was our task to deal, but not only with Russians and Belarusians, who might think there was our big problem, but also with Poles. We have quite also turbulent history, especially pre-war. And we thought that if we are not with Poles coming into this full understanding and showing to the world that despite differences, we can work together, that was also very important. And joining EU, NATO, these factors were very, very, very important in promoting both membership. When I would be traveling to Paris, and the French will say me, better to join EU, my answer was, look, if you agree with Lithuania's EU membership, how come that you are against NATO? Because this is, you don't want secure eastern flank, or you don't want French investment would not be under the NATO protection. So their argument was extremely important. So of course, fully agree. This is also a major factor of our synchronization of our two processes, NATO and EU.
Thank you, Eitvydas. Andžejs.
Yeah, I wanted actually to say something that Eitvydas mentioned about this, and what you asked actually about Russia and what I think. Obviously, what Eitvydas mentioned, the good neighborly relations was a major factor that we had to show to everyone in NATO, that we are actually wishing good relations with Russia, wishing good relations with Belarus, and obviously it was a parallel process, trying to extend hand to Russia and to show that we are for good relations. Just to mention one example, obviously, because we wanted to get in NATO, we wanted to take away this argument of territorial conflicts or potential troubles of new NATO member states. So we had to come to the consensus within the country that it's okay if Russians keep a small piece of our territory that they took away after our occupation, for the good of larger goal, for the good of our membership in NATO, in EU. And obviously, we did a lot of work also to show, to actually achieve integration of minorities in Latvian society. all the programs that were done. This was huge investment, actually. On one hand, we tried to show to the Russians, to Moscow, that we're a decent democracy. On the other hand, it helped us actually in the long term. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now that we're nearing the end of this event, would any of you like to make any sort of final comment, or closing comment? Yes, Eitvydas.
Actually, because we are so seriously talking about the NATO enlargement already for 1.5 hours, I end up with a joke. In 1995, I ended up as a young Lithuanian diplomat to NATO headquarters to work, including for NATO enlargement, for Lithuania's membership. And remember coming one of the first reception at NATO, which then became numerous. You come at standing with a glass of wine, and there is and then all gentlemen coming to me with uniform. I didn't recognize. I said, I am American Admiral. Okay. I said, where you son from? I said, Lithuania. Okay, firstly, I was explaining that we are not Balkans, we are Baltic. Okay, but that guy was okay. Okay, son, tell me, what is your Lithuania's priority in NATO? I said, to join the EU. And he started to laugh. I mean, guys, who are you president? You are lunatics. You can't join NATO. NATO is not OSCE, guys. And then I said, look, thank you for your opinion. I respect. But President Brazauskas wrote a letter to Manfred Werner, and we want to be NATO members, and we will be. So this is what is important in this process. You should have your own opinion. You should listen to advice. You should respect all the other opinions, but you should have your strong sort of line and carry it. So this is what we advise Ukrainians, Georgians, and many other countries who are eager to join NATO. Don't listen, take your line and continue.
Thank you, Eitvydas. Any other closing comments? Yes, Andžejs.
Yeah, if I may, I think if there is one thing that we did not succeed in the beginning of 2000s, I think we did not manage to convince the Westerners, the majority of the NATO member states, that Russia is not a she. We were trying to tell them a message that Russia is a wolf in sheep's skin. They didn't believe us. They didn't believe us even in 2008. If they would have believed us earlier, maybe the events that followed later on in 2014 and 2022 would have been different.
Thank you. Ambassador Sakkov.
My departing words from this seminar are that it was very good seminar. Thank you, Donatas, for putting it forward. Really good to see friends again. We are all currently in different countries, and Andžejs, congratulations on being able to stick to your country for a moment, at least. And I hope to see you all again in some form or the other.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid this is all we have time for today. I hope you agree that we had a really productive discussion, actually, very informative, and we've learned a lot. So thank you so much, first of all, to our three excellent panelists who gave a brilliant exposition of this very interesting topic. Very many thanks to our audience for your excellent questions, and special thanks to our research assistant, Kathy. If you enjoyed this discussion, please do follow us on social media and check back on our website to stay updated with our work. The video recording of this event will be uploaded in a few days. The Center also has a geopolitics podcast series, and all the episodes can be found on our website, on Spotify, or on our YouTube channel. So thank you very much again, and goodbye.